Okay, welcome to Ignorantia Legis episode 26, the 27th of October 2020. For today, mag-discuss kita makaigsunan sa Introductory to Taxation Law. By the way, ang katong uban na itong discussion na nasa playlist sa YouTube. Go to YouTube, look at the CBA TV channel and look for the playlist of all episodes of Ignorantia Legis. Pwede na siya ma-discuss niyo. Alright, so ngari kita sa introduction. Again, padayon na to ang taxation law. Okay. Now, ato nang gi-discuss ang characteristics sa taxation. It is comprehensive, it is unlimited, it is plenary, and it is supreme. Okay, it is comprehensive in a way that it covers persons, businesses, activities, professions, rights, and privileges. Unlimited in a sense that it is so unlimited in force and searching in extent that courts scarcely venture to declare that it is subject to any restrictions except those that such rests in the discretion of the authority which exercises it. Theo versus Vigigam Regulatory Board in 1987. Okay. Now, it is unlimited. It is plenary in a sense that under the National Internal Revenue Code or NERC, the BIR may avail of certain remedies to ensure the collection of taxes. And taxes being the lifeblood of government that should be collected without unnecessary hindrance, every precaution must be taken out not to unduly suppress it. And four, it must be supreme. It is supreme insofar as the selection of the subject of taxation is concerned, but it does not mean that it is superior to the other inherent powers of the state. Now, what is the concept of the wide spectrum of taxation? It means that taxation is one that extends to every business, trade or occupation, to every object of industry, use or enjoyment, and to every species of possession, and it imposes a burden which in case of failure to discharge the same may be followed by the seizure and confiscation of property after the observance of due process. Similarities among the powers of taxation, the police power, and the eminent domain. They are, number one, they are inherent powers of the state. The power of taxation, the police power, and the eminent domain. Power of eminent domain. Number two, they are all necessary attributes of the sovereign. Number three, they exist independently of the Constitution. Number four, they constitute the three methods by which the state interferes with private rights and property. Number five, they presuppose equivalent compensation. And number six, the legislature can exercise all three powers. Legislature. Can police power and taxation coexist in one act of the government? The answer is yes. Taxation is no longer envisioned as a measure merely to raise revenue to support the existence of government. Taxes may be levied with a regulatory purpose to provide a means for the rehabilitation and stabilization of a threatened industry which is affected with public interest as to be within the police power of the state. Caltex versus COA. And thus, the power of taxation may be exercised to implement police power. So ato na nang na-discuss previously ang comparison between the three. So, example problem. Ordinance number SP thus 2095 SP thus 2095 of the Quezon City government imposes a socialized housing tax equivalent to 0.5% on the assessed value of the land in excess of 100,000. The SHT will be used as one of the sources of funds for urban development and housing program. Can the Quezon City government impose such tax? The answer is yes. Cities are allowed to exercise such powers and discharge such functions and responsibilities as are necessary, appropriate, or incidental to efficient and effective provision of the basic services and facilities, which include, among others, programs and projects for low-cost housing and other mass dwellings. The collections made accrue to its socialized housing programs and projects. The tax is not a pure exercise of taxing power or merely to raise revenue. It is levied with a regulatory purpose. The levy is primarily the exercise of the police power for general welfare of the entire city. Ferrer versus Bautista in 2015. Kaya kung taka nilang kuan ba, sa unsa na lang ibuhat nga tax under the guise of police power, taxation power. Grabe. O gaminaw ka na turon si Shirley de la Serna, si Hazel Owano, o si Felipe Miñosa, si Alan Alicante. Okay, balik kita magkaigsunan sa Ignorantia Legis. Now, distinguish taxation power from police power. Taxation power as to purpose is to raise revenue. Police power as to purpose is to promote public purpose through regulations. As to the amount of exaction, taxation, no limit. As to the amount of exaction for police power, limited only to the cost of regulation, issuance of the license, or surveillance. Benefits received. Taxation as to benefits received, no special or direct benefit is received by the taxpayer, merely the general benefit of protection. As to police power, no direct benefit is received, a healthy economic standard of society is attained. Non-impairment of contracts. Contracts may not be impaired under the taxation power. Under police power, contracts may be impaired. As to transfer of property rights, taxes paid become part of the public funds as to taxation. And then with respect to the police power, with respect to the aspect of transfer of property rights, no transfer but only restraint in its exercise. As to scope, taxation power, all persons, property, and excises. As to the police power, as to scope, all persons, property, rights, and privileges. Taxation is distinguishable from police power as to the means employed to implement these public goals. Those doctrines that are unique to taxation arose from peculiar considerations such as those especially the punitive aspects of taxation and the belief that taxes are the lifeblood of the state, yet at the same time it has been recognized that taxation may be made the implement of the state's police power. Southern Cross versus cement manufacturers in 2005. So here's a sample problem. Galaxia Telecoms Company constructed a telecoms tower for the purpose of receiving and transmitting cellular telecommunications. Meanwhile, the municipal authorities passed an ordinance entitled An Ordinance Regulating the Establishment of Special Projects, which imposed fees to regulate activities particularly related to the construction and maintenance of various structures, certain construction activities of the identified special projects, which includes cell sites or telecommunications towers. Is the imposition of the fee an exercise of the power of taxation? The answer is no. The designation given by the municipal authorities does not decide whether the imposition is properly a license tax or a license fee. The determining factors are the purpose and effect of the imposition of any fees or taxes as may be apparent from the provisions of the ordinance. if the generation of the revenue is the primary purpose and the regulation is merely incidental, the imposition then is classified as a tax. But if regulation is the primary purpose, the fact that incidentally revenue is also obtained does not make that specific imposition a tax. So, is it a tax or is it a license fee? Hirotse versus Department of Energy in 2007. Okay, pag-bantayan na to eh. The fees in the ordinance are not impositions on the building or the structure itself. This refers to the previous problem. Rather, they are impositions on the activity subject of government regulation, such as the installation and construction of the structures. It is primarily regulatory in nature and not primarily revenue raising. While the fees may contribute to the revenues of the municipality, this effect is merely incidental. Thus, the fees imposed in the said ordinance are not taxes. Smart Communications versus the municipality of Malbar, Batangas in 2014. So, another problem. Revenue laws, RA 6260 and Presidential Decree 276 were enacted to establish the Coconut Investment Fund and the Coconut Consumers Stabilization Fund, or COCO levy funds. These funds shall be owned by the coconut farmers in their private capacities under the Coconut Industry Code. In the year 2000, EO 313 was issued creating the Coconut Trust Fund and designating the UCPB as the trustee bank. This aimed to provide financial assistance to the coconut farmers, to the coconut industry, and to other agri-related programs. UCPB provided assistance. UCPV suggested that the COCO levy funds are closely similar to the SSS funds, which have been declared to be not public funds, but properties of the SSS members and held merely in trust by the government. So, the question is this: are the COCO levy funds in the nature of taxes and thus can only be used for public purpose? Some tax tong COCO levy or contributions? So the question is, are the COCO levy funds in the nature of taxes and thus can only be used for public purpose? The answer is yes. The COCO levy funds were raised pursuant to law to support a proper governmental purpose. They were raised with the use of the police and taxing powers of the state for the benefit of the coconut industry and its farmers in general. Unlike the ordinary revenue laws, RA 6260 and PD 276 did not raise money to boost the government's general funds, but to provide means for the rehabilitation and stabilization of a threatened industry, the coconut industry, which is so affected with public interests as it is within the police power of the states. The subject laws are akin to the imposed sugar liens. It cannot be likened to the SSS law, which collects premium contributions that are not taxes and not for public purpose. The SSS members pay contributions in exchange for insurance protection and benefits like loans, medical or health services, and retirement package. Pambansang koalisyon ng pagsamahang magsasaka at manggagawa sa niyugan versus Executive Secretary in 2012. So another example. On February 26, 2004, Republic Act 9257 was issued, amending RA 7432, which provides that the 20% senior citizen discount may be claimed as a tax deduction from gross income, gross sales, or gross receipts. Petitioners challenge the constitutionality and pray that the tax credit treatment of the 20% discount be reinstated. They posit that the resolution of this case lies in the determination of whether the legally mandated 20% senior citizen discount is an exercise of police power or eminent domain. If it is police power, no just compensation is warranted. But if it is eminent domain, the tax reduction scheme is unconstitutional because it is not a peso for peso reimbursement of the 20% discount given to citizens. Thus, it constitutes taking of private property without payment of just compensation. Is the tax deduction scheme an exercise of police power or the power of eminent domain? Okay. Property, kwarta, property na. Answer. Police power. The 20% discount given to senior citizens is a valid exercise of police power. Thus, even if the current law, through its tax deduction scheme, which abandoned the tax credit scheme under the previous law, does not provide for a peso for peso reimbursement of the 20% discount given by private establishments, no constitutional infirmity obtains because, being a valid exercise of police power, payment of just compensation is not warranted. The 20% discount is intended to improve the welfare of senior citizens who at their age are less likely to be gainfully employed, more prone to illnesses and other disabilities, and thus in need of subsidy in purchasing basic commodities. The discount serves to honor senior citizens who presumably spent the productive years of their lives on contributing to the development and progress of the nation. This distinct cultural Filipino practice of honoring the elderly is an integral part of this law. As to its nature and effects, the 20% discount is a regulation affecting the ability of private establishments to price their products and services relative to a special case of individuals, senior citizens, for which the Constitution affords preferential concern. Manila Memorial Park versus the SWD in 2013. Now, what are the principles of a sound tax system? Basic principles of a sound tax system. Fiscal adequacy, number 1. And administrative feasibility, number 2. Fiscal adequacy. Revenue raised must be sufficient to meet government or public expenditures neither an excess or a deficiency of revenue vis-a-vis the needs of the government will be in keeping with the principle. Number 2, administrative feasibility. The tax system should be capable of being effectively administered and enforced with the least inconvenience to the taxpayer. Question: true or false? A law that allows taxes to be paid either in cash or in kind is valid. True or false? The answer is true. There is no law which requires payment of taxes in cash only. However, a law allowing payment of taxes in kind, although valid, may pose problems of valuation. Hence, will violate the principle of administrative feasibility. Okay, so the basic principles of sound tax systems are: number 1, fiscal adequacy; number 2, administrative feasibility; and number 3, theoretical justice. A. Under theoretical justice, must take into consideration the taxpayer's ability to pay. This is called the ability to pay theory. And Article 6, Section 28 mandates that the rule on taxation must be uniform and equitable, and that the state may evolve a progressive system of taxation. A violation of the principle of a sound taxation system may or may not invalidate a tax law. A tax law will retain its validity even if it is not in consonance with the principles of fiscal adequacy, administrative feasibility, or theoretical justice. These principles are only designed to make our tax system sound. However, if a tax law runs contrary to the principle of theoretical justice, such violation will render the law unconstitutional, considering that under the Constitution, the rule of taxation should be uniform and equitable. So, question: is the value-added tax law violative of the administrative feasibility principle? The answer is no. The VAT law is principally aimed to rationalize the system of taxes on goods and services, thus simplifying tax administration and making the system more equitable to enable the country to attain economic recovery. Kapatiran ng naglilingkod ng sa pamalaan versus Tan in 1988. Is the imposition of VAT, value-added tax, on tollway operations valid? The answer is yes. Administrative feasibility is one of the canons of a sound tax system. Non-observance of the canon, however, will not render a tax imposition invalid, except to the extent that specific constitutional or statutory limitations are impaired. Thus, even if the imposition of the VAT, value-added tax, on tollway operations may seem burdensome to implement, it is not necessarily invalid unless some aspect of it is shown to violate any law or the Constitution. Diaz versus Secretary of Finance in 2011. Another problem. Frank Chavez, as taxpayer and Realty Owners Association of the Philippines, RUAP, alleged that EO 73, Executive Order 73, providing for the collection of real property taxes, as provided for under Section 21 of PD 464 or the Real Property Tax Code, is unconstitutional because it accelerated the application of the General Revision of Assessments to January 1, 1987, thereby increasing real property taxes by 100% to 400% on improvements and up to 100% on land, which would necessarily lead to confiscation of property. Is the contention of Chavez and RUAP correct? Answer: no. Without Executive 73, the basis for collection of real property taxes will still be the 1978 revision of property values. Certainly, to continue collecting real property taxes based on valuations arrived at several years ago, in disregard of the increases in the value of real properties that have occurred since then, is not in consonance with a sound tax system. Fiscal adequacy, which is one of the characteristics of a sound tax system, requires that the sources of government revenues must be adequate to meet government expenditures. Chavez versus Ongpin in 1990. Now, what is the scope and limitation of taxation? Inherent limitations. It must be for public purpose, inherently legislative, territorial, international committee, and the exemption of government entities, agencies, and instrumentalities. Those are just the inherent limitations. There are, of course, also what is called as the constitutional limitations. For example, under the Constitution, prohibition against imprisonment for the non-payment of poll tax, Article 3, Section 20. B. Uniformity and equality of taxation, Article 6, Section 28. C. Grant of Congress of authority to the President to impose tariff rates, Article 6, Section 28. D. Prohibition against taxation of religious, charitable entities, and educational entities, Article 6, Section 28. E. Prohibition against taxation of non-stock, non-profit educational institutions, Article 9, Section 4. F. Majority vote of Congress for the grant of a tax exemption, Article 6, Section 28. G. Prohibition on the use of tax levied for special purpose, Article 6, Section 29. H. President's veto on appropriation, revenue, and tariff bills, Article 6, Section 27. Non-impairment of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, Article 6, Section 30. Grants of power to the LGUs to create its own sources of revenues, Article 9, Section 5. Origin of revenue on tariff bills, Article 6, Section 24. Nato originate ang revenue of tariff bills. Appropriation, revenue on tariff bills, ART, nato magsugod sa Congress, House of Representatives. L. No appropriation or use of public money for religious purposes. So those are the constitutional provisions directly affecting taxation. Now, there are also constitutional provisions indirectly affecting taxation. 1. Due process. A. B. Equal Protection Clause, Section 1. C. Religious freedom, Section 5. D. Non-impairment of obligations of contract, Section 10. E. Freedom of the press, Section 4. So those are the limitations, the inherent limitations and constitutional limitations. So, mani importante makaigsunan. Anyway, di na ta mo sugod sa ubang session pa, malanganin ka special topic makaigsunan. So, thank you and good afternoon. Salamat yung pag-iuban ka nako. Kini si J. sa Ignorantia Legis, episode 26, October 27, 2020. Thank you and good afternoon.